I am so excited about this conference because, very simply put, the doctors and exhibitors at this conference alone could save this nation. All we need to do is throw out the failing paradigm of health care and replace it with the paradigm that the participants at this conference learn, hear, understand, and believe in. I've had personally very powerful experiences with many of the exhibitors that are here. For example, I had an ear that was completely closed off. I couldn't hear, and the Supermora, when I was in Switzerland, brought my hearing back when nothing had done. So I've had the privilege of being treated by Dr. Simon Yu so that he made sure my gallbladder meridian came back to life, and that the parasites that we all have are taken care of. And then I couldn't do what I've done because I have stopped the need for bypass surgery on all of my patients by simply using the lumbrokinase as an addition to my oral chelation. The oral chelation that I do is 9 pills. That's called my oral chelation program. As the father of IV chelation, I realized that not everybody has a vein or the money to the time to go to a doctor, so I had to figure out what's the key thing. So that you'll see in the slides. But it's interesting to know that we have at this conference Dr. Doug Cook, and when my patient about 15 plus years ago was supposed to go blind with pigmentary glaucoma, I couldn't have brought his vision back without the capable assistance of Dr. Doug Cook. And with Occidental Institute, I went to Germany and learned these things and went to these kinds of conferences. And as you'll see with my FIGHT program, F-I-G-H-T, the I stands for infection. And when you're loaded with infection, you need to have things like ozone, ultraviolet blood. And so we have at this conference ultraviolet blood. So it's really with a lot of excitement that I want to get into my presentation today. The Mayan prophecy says that the world might come to an end in a little over a year from now, but we do know when we read this morning's newspaper that we are alive in the middle of major changes that are going on. And those changes, in fact, were described very well by Greg Braden when he looked historically. As you all know, the North Pole may become South Pole, and that usually happens every 250,000 years. But it's been over 700,000 years, so it's overdue. So it's starting to change now. So there's global magnetic field changes going on, which may have something to do with the pending collapse of our system, because about 5,000 years ago, we went through the same thing. We had the global warming, we had wars, we had violence, collapse of an entire dynasty. And at that time, when the Earth's magnetic field is weakened, we don't hold the ozone in place. And when the ozone's not held in place, nothing to do with Al Gore, he's completely on the wrong toot. What you have is with a magnet, you hold the ozone, which protects us from being fried by the sun. And that's why you have this warming and these interesting Earth changes that we have the pleasure or pain of living through, because we are going to see the magnetic field is changing, the compass needles are moving. So what's going on is very clear, and you're not going to be able to ignore it. This was the hottest summer on record. We're having, as you can see, things happening. So where does the magnetic field come from? Well, that little thing in the center of our Earth, which is about the size of a moon, is molten hot iron. Now, if that were to cool like it is in Mars, then none of us would be talking unless we were tied to a PEMF device. Because in space, the astronauts must be tied to pulsed electromagnetic field. So it gets a little complicated. How does molten iron, because iron has the ability to generate electric current, and when you generate electric current is when you get a magnetic field. So we are living at a time that there's a major change going. Now, the Earth's magnetic field hasn't flipped for 780,000 years, but now that North Pole is moving quite dramatically. We've had to renumber the runway in Tampa because North is not there anymore, it's over here. So one day it will be visiting Wisconsin, but it might wind up in the South Pole. We don't know. But these are things that historically occur. So as the Earth's magnetic field weakens, how much of a weakening has already occurred? Why are we still alive? How dangerous is it? Well, it turns out that one time we were at 5 Gauss. Today we're at 0.5 Gauss. So you can do the math on that. That's a 90% reduction. So if it goes to 0, we have nothing to talk about because all metabolism requires magnetism. Swallowing your supplements will do nothing unless you have magnetism, because the electron exchange that must occur will not happen. So this is kind of interesting, because we have that change, and then we have people being told that the sun is so dangerous, which is such a sad story. Because if you look at the facts at the cancer conference I just attended, we can show you that the more you slather on sun blockers, the more cancer you get, because they are all so toxic. And then you can take your 5,000 units of D, and that's interesting. But Alan Gaby pointed out at the naturopathic conference 2.5 weeks ago that I attended that actually sun provides many of the metabolites of D that we aren't getting just by swallowing the pill. So it's a shame that we all are so afraid of the sun. Now, I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, and my mom had many, many skin cancers, but Frederick Moe, M-O-H-S, was my neighbor, and he proved that all skin cancers are 100% curable. So I live in the sun, but I inherited the defect. I've had at least 50 skin cancers, but I can show you how to deal with them. But the thing is that the magnetic field that affects the immune system is kind of an important situation for us to think about. So one Japanese researcher has tried to define for you what the magnetic deficiency syndrome is, because everyone in this room is suffering that. I can say that unequivocally, because at these conferences, when I train doctors in pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, everyone that we treat sees a benefit, but not everybody gets electrified as I did. The first treatment that I took about 7+ months ago, I knew that my life changed. But why? As you'll see in my slides, since I have major health problems my entire life, and I'm now 76, I've managed to overcome all of those health problems doing what all of us in this room believe in. And you'll see my exact program. But if I had no other deficiency and I was only waiting for the spark, for somebody to kick over the engine, to turn on my battery and recharge my cells, then that's why when I got off of a 9-minute treatment, which is available for all of you to experience while you're here, when I got up, I knew my life had changed. So it's not just stiffness of the shoulder and lumbago. You can look at this. There isn't any symptom that anybody has that couldn't be related to the story. Because in a final sense, you're talking about mitochondrial dysfunction. You're talking about the electron transport chain. And with the toxins that we all have in our body, we'll get into how many of them there are. With those toxins, you don't generate the actual ATP that cells take to do their work. And so when we realize that until you can bring that membrane charge back up, and cancer always is a low, very low, about 30 millivolts. Your heart has about 120 millivolts. That's why the heart virtually never gets primary cancer. But it's the rest of the problem that your cells should be around 70, and none of you are operating where you should or could be, because the toxins are going to clearly interfere with the electron transport chain, so you don't keep the ATP levels up, so you don't have the charge that you should have. So these devices, this is the one that I got because I wanted to treat my horse, and coincidentally my horse does earn good money. They jump these 6 and 7 feet jumps in Grand Prix show jumping in $25,000 and $50,000 payoffs. And of course, I cheat. I have the horse on my vitamin C, on zeolite, and I treat the horse with this. So my horse has not knocked a rail down, and we beat $2 and $3 million World Cup champions because of our cheating. So eventually everybody will wake up and they'll start doing the same thing. Then it'll get tougher. But right now, we've got the edge because nobody knows what zeolite is. We'll get literature in your hand so that you can learn what zeolite, and you don't know how to make vitamin C do what it has to do, which is get intracellular. We'll try to cover that rapidly. But we do know that we are all needing electric charge. So the Alpha Stim that has a booth here, I've seen miraculous things. The things that are here are tools that I have used that I know all of you need to learn how to use, because the healthcare system is really failing, and people can't afford the nonsense that's going on. So when we look at places like Columbia University, way back in '93, trying to tell you that whatever's going wrong, you can definitely see some major changes when you do PEMF. Now, in Germany, where I do a lot of studying, the government paid for PEMF devices, even though they're expensive, but it was cheaper than replacing hips and knees on people. And so, of course, all that changes over time, and they try to put that out because they need the money to do all those surgical procedures. But I want you to know that regeneration is what I'm talking to you about. I feel so fantastic at age 76 that I don't believe it's legal. In other words, I have spent my lifetime regaining my health. I've spent millions of dollars sitting in the front row in conferences in every part of the world because I, at age 29, had to close my medical office. I could never go up a flight of steps without going into early heart failure. I have had a heart block, so then until the last couple of months, I was only getting one beat, was skipped out of every 3. Now I have no skip beats, so I've regenerated this body. I've regenerated my back pain, my prostate. I'm a new person because I do all the things that I'll cover rapidly in my fight program. I've been doing all that, but I was missing that kickstart of the battery to make it all work. So this we'll have a chance to go into a little more this evening. So the PEMF, how it works, obviously it is very important, or you wouldn't have had it provably 40 years ago. Take fractures that had never healed on somebody, and after 5 years when it's hopeless, applying PEMF and bringing that fracture back to full healing. Now, if that's fact, and that was what is FDA approved for those indications, and it's now being used at places like Stanford, UCLA, and Yale, so how can you make something heal after 5 years of non-healing? Well, just put in Google PEMF plus stem cell, and you'll see that it increases the proliferation and differentiation of stem cells, obviously to get a new leg where it didn't work before. And that's why I have a new prostate, a new bladder, a new kidney, and that's why doctors using this equipment see the creatinine cleanse improve everything, because you're making things younger. And part of that's tied to the mitochondria and the electron flow through the electron transport chain. So all of these things are understandable because today we're in a position to have a better understanding of what PEMF could be doing. And it's pretty exciting because you're really turning on growth factors. So when you're turning on growth factors, do I need to fly to China to get stem cells? No. Why not just use the stem cells that are in my body, but give my body the energy so that it can make those things happen? So the dynamics of pain and PEMF, there's so many papers about it, but it's good to understand that one thing is you're going to pump out the sodium out of those swollen cells and let the potassium in, and that's where you're going to start to get the restoration of charge. So the treatment of non-union fracture, there's 2,000 published papers on PEMF, so we won't belabor the point. It's just nice to have the understanding that good things happen. It reduces inflammation, it increases the lymphatic. So the more you read about it, it's pretty obvious that there isn't a practice in the nation that wouldn't be helped. In fact, Dr. Martin Milner wrote in the Townsend newsletter a year and a half ago how his patient in total cardiac failure, having had stenting that failed, bypass that failed, she was in total heart failure, needed a heart transplant. He started treating her in the office 10 minutes with the little device that he leases for $480 a month. And she started getting better. And then she said, well, I'm not going to come in twice a week. This is helping. I'm going to come daily. Then she started saying, I need 20 minutes. And then she said, to heck with it. She could buy one for $20,000. She bought one and treated herself an hour a day. At the end of 4 months, she rides down the street on her own bicycle, and she's a brand new heart. So that's what you can do with this. This guy had 3.5 years of that not looking like this. This is in 5 weeks, kind of improved a little bit in 5 weeks. The effect on the brain, the reason the FDA approved it was for the treatment of depression. But once you have it approved to treat to the brain, because it didn't occur to me, the guy who owned the company in Germany that was selling the PEMF became my patient and friend, and he retired to San Diego. It never occurred to me to apply that thing to my head. and now we have YouTube pictures of autistic child recovering speech, never had speech in 18 years, and Guillain-Barré getting out of a wheelchair, Parkinson's stopping shaking and virtually. So it's playing it to the head's not a bad place. The head is going to need that same charge that everything else needs. So when you get into the aging brain and start to understand, there's a lot that's going to happen. In fact, The device that is available and is demonstrated here is really an exercise device. It is really a muscle exercise, but it will exercise your prostate and your kidney and your pancreas and all parts in between. I have had to reduce the prescription because my vision got better, and I don't think I'm going to need the hearing aid I was having. So I think that when we exercise things, that it's pretty exciting to see that exercise is always associated with longer survival, even for brain cancer. The difference was 13 months to 21 months. Those with brain cancer that were going to die because they did their chemo radiation, they hadn't heard our good friend Dr. Simon Yu talk this morning. They didn't know about parasites, so they were just getting fried and surgery and all that stuff. So the Alzheimer's disease, anything is going to help these patients. This is the lady that was in the wheelchair for 8 years with Guillain-Barré. She started going to the chiropractor, and I do webinars and interview these doctors that I've been training to use the device. And we have doctors that love to treat ALS now, love to treat MS, but he wound up treating this lady, and she saw the same thing. She was getting enough benefit at the office. Coming to the office, she said, I'm going to buy a machine, and that she was, in 2 months, she was walking into church on her own power. So how it works, we have so much information on my website, so I've organized it in a pretty good fashion. So anybody going to Gordon Research, and the members of my FACT group, which is 3,000 health professionals, are getting bombarded with the 3 emails I send out each day, and there's no charge for that. And I encourage all of you, if you haven't joined FACT, the literature about joining FACT is at the booth where you can get your demonstration of the PMF device. But if you understand all of these things, how it works, Gordon Research online, if you go to my thing, it is easy, or you can just use Google, but I've organized it for you a little bit better. Now, FIGHT is my program that I'm proud of, and it really came out of a book called The Autoimmune Epidemic by Donna Jackson Nakazawa. And she was a Johns Hopkins patient with Guillain-Barré twice, total body paralysis, and she got the book endorsed by the director at NIH of autoimmune disease and by the director at Johns Hopkins. Now, why is that important? Well, the book has stories about the F and the I and the G and the H and the T, the food, the infection, genetics, the heavy metal, hormone, toxin. What kind of stories? Stories of usually a doctor who was near death, who nobody had ever told to get off gluten, that kind of story. Or the doctor who was near dead and nobody ever told him that there's things called Lyme. And so across the board, I just made my acronym to help your patients understand that these chronic diseases tie always to fixing all of the problems. And if you think that in America we restore 1930 cars and make them look brand new, that's called classic car restoring. Well, very few people can afford to restore those cars. It costs a lot to restore my body, but for me it's worth it. And so I'm just saying that when you do taillight to bumper, when you do everything, amazing things can happen. So the food, the infection, the genetics, the heavy metals, the hormone, toxin, we'll get into it a little bit more. So that if you're going to, how do you know what to eat? Well, there's a very good gene test that gives you a hint as to whether or not you would do better on an Atkins or on a Pritikin approach. And that's kind of where things are going to go. But meantime, everybody who changes their diet in any direction does better because we are all being killed by the food we're eating. One of the reasons for that is Monsanto with the genetic engineering. So we all have leaky gut. So if we're going to figure out which food to eat, how are you going to help your patients figure it out? Well, they got to avoid the ones that they're sensitive to. We're going to try to eat organic. We have proof that eating organic will dramatically reduce the number of pesticides in the urine of any child, and instead they're just going to give them a drug. I mean, we have 1 out of 4 children today in school is being treated for either their depression or their diabetes or their cancer or their autism or their ADHD. I mean, we have an epidemic of people being treated with drugs without treating, obviously, the cause. And genetically modified is near the top. So if we look at that, how do we really know enough about the food? So things like this can educate your patients. And if you're going to be a leader in this field, you need to take your patients and rent a little space on a Holiday Inn or something and require your patients once a year to attend a conference where you charge them nothing and they bring in their own food, but you teach them what you're learning at these conferences. Because it's not set up for you. When they come into you, they have a pain in something. And in that time, you can't tell them all the exciting things you've learned in the previous couple of months. that could help change their life. So think about bringing your patients in and requiring them, if they want to remain in good standing with you, to come to that conference so you can download and teach them what, for example, the leaky gut and how it's tied to the genetically modified food and how Monsanto is involved. A book written by Patrick Carlisle is a pen name for Patrick Kingsley in London. He specialized in treating MS, but he didn't want to get booted out of his license in London, so he used this. But this book is filled with stories of people whose lives were being wrecked because nobody had found the food that needed to be stopped. One lady had been studied on metabolic wards because they couldn't get any weight off of her. They tried virtually 0 calories. When they took her off carrots, everything changed. And that book is worthwhile knowing about. So getting to the root of the problem, obviously we have we have a really sad story in our country today. They gave a great talk at the naturopathic conference telling you how if you're on Nexium, you are a slave and you're being drilled into a position that you will not absorb your iron, your magnesium, and you will be very hard pressed to get off of it, because your body gets used to not having any stomach acid. When you go off it, you think you're hurting. So we have to teach you how to use red clay, how to use other things, how to use herbs. We've got to help the population get off these drugs, whether you talk about Fosamax or whether you talk about the antidepressants that people virtually can't get off of. It's pretty frightening when you really get the picture. So getting to the root of the problem, I use fiber, and this is stabilized rice bran, and I have everybody get some acidophilus, and we have to do something to kill the dysbiotic stuff so that you lower. In case you don't see Dr. Simon Yu and find out which parasite you have, you need to do something because all of us have a suboptimal gut. Now you get to the point is, how are you going to get people to do all this? What kind of test are you going to do? Because if we just do this testing, it's pretty expensive to correct all the things that I'm talking about. So we'll look at ways that might motivate some patients. Some are more fearful about cancer. So I worked with Kobayashi in Tokyo, and we had 10,000 patients, 10 years, and none of them died of cancer. That program's on my website, gordonresearch.com. Put in the word cancer. Up comes World Without Cancer. We tell you how simple it is. Even though they have BRCA1, BRCA2 gene, or they have the gene for gastric carcinoma, and everybody in their family dies of gas, nobody expresses, because I'm in the world that when you control the environment, the genetics are not controlling. So you then have to change the attitude, because the body-mind medicine, thoughts, feeling, experiences, all have so much to do with it. The power of the heart's electromagnetic field, heart math, is very exciting to realize how far that magnetic field goes from our heart. And how if all of us were on the same wavelength, we virtually can stop violence in New York City, documented, as you'll see in books like this one by Bruce Lipton. This book, Spontaneous Evolution, is so far advanced that if you don't have it, buy it. It is my strongest suggestion, because we all know that there's some tough times ahead, but he has a very positive attitude that the magnetic field of a coherent group of people wanting to change the violence and the things going on can actually change things. So this is an interesting book to read. And as my friend Jeff Bland is trying to teach you, it's the environment that's involved in changing these expressions of things. So we have all these doctors. I listen to NYU Medical Center on the radio wherever I drive my car. Sirius Satellite has, free of charge, you can hear the heads of every department talk about cancer, heart disease, sports medicine, men's, and you can hear their answers to the public calling in. And I'd like to shoot them, because the answers that they're giving are so unhealthy. And they are absolutely, they're to the point now, it's really a great business. You fail the BRCA test, and we have it all figured out. Now, we'll take both of your breasts off, and then both your ovaries off. But not to worry, because we're going to take fat off your behind, and we're going to give you a new breast, and we're going to save the nipple, and it's going to be like nothing ever happened. And we can do that for everybody. Isn't that wonderful? That's the latest stuff going on at NYU Medical Center. All you have to do is get that gene test, and that's going to really change. And all the people in our study in Tokyo, many of them had gastric carcinoma, everybody in their family. None of them on the simple program. What's the simplest program you could imagine? Lower the stress, simplify the diet, do some detoxification, use some far infrared sauna, use some immune support. This isn't rocket science. But how do you get the patients to do that? Fortunately, Dr. Kobayashi is a molecular biologist, so he can talk cell signaling. He also became an MD and a pathologist, and then he became an oncologist. You can find one on every street corner, I'm sure, but he is a very bright guy. And we got the Sun Moon Church to fund, so the patients were required to spend $500 a year and do a very advanced panel of tests that tells you exactly how much cancer you've got. That's one way. Fear. I like fear. It keeps a tight rein because we got the guys to stop smoking. We got them to actually exercise. Because when your cancer test is getting a little bit too close to the flame and you're going to have a lump bump, because everybody has cancer, but it takes 7-8 years for the lump bump to form. That's one way. I'm interested in anti-aging. I could send you to, you could write down imhealth.com. That's a website where you can immediately learn every test that will tell you how old you are, how near, how far you can read, you know, how many candles you can blow out, how long you can stand on one foot with your eyes closed. That's a long nerve. Kids do it when they laugh at you. All of you fall down because that nerve needs a lot of regeneration. So as we start looking at the gene in our genie, the epigenetic changes that are going on because of the little things that we now have, like bisphenol A, that's the hardener in the plastic bottles we've been drinking out. In this one book, you're going to see some very amazing things about the epigenetic changes and what we can do to fight back. Now, the infection story, when you listen to people that talk Lyme, I changed the word L-Y-M-E to L-I-M-E-S, Lyme's, lowered immune metabolic encephalopathy syndrome. In other words, Lyme doesn't exist, folks. Lyme is just a code name for somebody who's got all the things wrong that I'm talking about here. For the love of Pete, if you get bit by a tick, and if you have the mercury poisoning, the bad mouth, the bad focus at home, you'd hate your job. Obviously, that tick can take over because you got nothing to fight back, and you're in a magnetic deprived environment. So think about why some people can get bit and they stay sick. How can you make everybody tougher? Vitamin C is still something that almost would help the food, the infection, the genetics, the heavy metals, hormone, toxin. Well, how does it involve the genetics? Well, the L-gulanolactone is a deficiency in your enzyme that prevents you from eating that ice cream. The sugar doesn't go directly to vitamin C because you're not the rest of the animal kingdom. We lost that gene. So if we understand Tom Levy, he has 1,200 references. Now, those 1,200 references, if you actually took the time to read them, would empower you to know that no matter what the toxin or what the infection, there is a dose if you found a vitamin C that would get a high enough level. So you're going to see that we will have at the booth a stick, and all of you are going to take that stick and you're going to wet it with your urine. You don't have to bring it back to show it to me. You know, very simple thing. It's green now, and if you can't make it go yellow right away, you're in trouble. And if it stays green, you are in deep trouble because staying green, it used to mean scurvy. Today it really means that you don't have enough antioxidant capacity to handle your oxidative load. At the conference we just attended, some very famous people, their tests stayed green. And I've recharged them with the right kind of vitamin C that's a vitamin C delivery system, and their life was changed within a day, people who've been sick for a long time. So simply, some simple tests are sometimes very helpful. So the relationship between vitamin C, it's documented that you reduce the risk of death in everybody by a minimum of 50% by bringing them up. But you have to understand what Les Packer was talking about. How does this stuff work? What we did is we added ribose, and then we've added things like trimethylglycine, methylsulfonamethyne to deal with the methylation. So we did some pretty sophisticated stuff, and part of what we did is there's cell signaling going on, and there are essential sugars. You've heard about them, but the essential sugars like mannose and galactose and fucose, these assist the cell in taking in the vitamin C now, so now you're intracellular. So that's enough on that topic, but I wanted everybody to understand that my friend, and Bob Cathcart was my patient years ago, Bob Cathcart pointed out that it's electrons is what we're dealing with. Everything finally becomes electron deficiency disease. So now you can marry the physics together of electricity and using magnetism. But this is what I wanted to make sure all of you understand. That little stick is green. There's going to be one for you at the booth. And if you stay green, then you're going to come back and say, I need to figure out how to fix this. If you're on a decent program, you'll come somewhere in here. But we have found that 98% of people are unable to be over here and keep it there 24/7. So the clinic that specializes in treating cancer, the Reardon Clinic in Wichita, uses this system and that product because they call their clinic the Bright Spot Clinic. Because if you have a bright spot, you have a bright future. Now, if you have a bright spot, obviously you're wasting a lot of money. That's vitamin C just going right out in your urine. But how did it get in the urine unless it was in the blood? And how did it get in the blood unless you absorbed it? And so how did it get high enough to be absorbed? Because it didn't tear up your guts. I have doctor after doctor who's never taken more than 1,000 milligrams of C because they say it kills me. That was me. That's why this product was made. Linus Pauling was my mentor, and I was an orthomolecular physician. And my brother could take 18 grams, and he could go right through the poison oak and never break out. If I took more than a gram, it tore me up, so I suffered with the poison oak. So I had to say, how can we get me to take 18 grams without having to die? And so that's what we worked on. So anyhow, the genetics, epigenetics has led to the methylation changes going on, and you need to know that this guy, Randy Girdle, at Duke University, if you understand what he's showing you here, he's showing you that these beautiful lean brown agouti mice, in order to turn all of their offspring for all time into fat, obese, diabetic, kind of like America, all he had to do was warm the food in a plastic container like what mothers use when they warm the baby food. And that released enough of the bisphenol A that he got the epigenetic change, and overnight we have diabetes that is permanent until you learn how to use the right methylating agents and you can bring it back. So this is association between methylation and obesity. Of course we have an obese nation, and the toxic heavy metal exposure early in life is part of this, but it's tied to epigenetics. Epigenetics means above genetics. If you didn't have any diabetes in your family, but now you're diabetic, that very likely ties to this little problem of environment. So heavy metals is what I teach a lot about, and we can teach people the epigenetic of aging. I really, at age 76, repeat that I'm confident that the program that I'm telling you about can take anyone with any condition that is motivated and happens to be able to afford to do what it takes to address a war on 5 different fronts: food, infection, genetics, heavy metals, hormones, toxins. That's a lot of stuff to deal with. So you've got to have somebody that happens to think it's important. Like Doug Cook and I share a patient that thinks things are important. He does everything, and he never went blind. He was told at age 42 he'd be blind with pigmentary glaucoma in 2 years. He assigned me the job of making sure he didn't go blind, and he still flies his jet airplane. But it's with people like Doug and the testing and the things that we do. And the Biotron, which has got a little device right next to where the magnet is, allowed us to test wherever he goes, everything. So it was portable. I love all the testing, but it's something nice to know that there's something that sells for $1,200 that can do things. But what the good news is this: you can fix that methylation defect with remedies as right as the right kind of vitamins and minerals, but what are the right ones? So that gets into, do you all understand the difference between regular folic acid and the 5'-methyl tetrahydrofolate you need to be on if you're trying to reach your maximum intended useful lifespan? If you don't, you're going to have to learn, because it's really critical. So I use the methyl B12 and I use the methyl form. That's the 5'-methyl tetrahydrofolate, because regular folic acid will not get you there because you've been exposed to things that have impaired your methylation. So we'll get into this more, but the nutrition, the genes, the brain, so folic acid is one you want to learn about. So I put the methyl B12 and the right 3 different forms of folic acid into a sublingual application. The heavy metals, who's got a heavy metal problem? Everybody, obviously. You can't be, and so National Geographic exposed this whole story. And they showed that the mother gets rid of all the heavy metals into the baby. It downloads it. That's her way of getting rid of lead and mercury. But the baby comes out with how much lead average in the bones today, according to Caltech? 1,000 times more lead in the bones than any bones 700 years ago in everybody on the planet today. That's Caltech, Claire Patterson. He's done all the work to find when did it come into the environment. He drilled at the Arctic and the Antarctic way down and took the snow to find out when did we poison our air. And it was obviously the industrial age. But we did a real good job when we put the lead in the gas. And it was my laboratory, which was Mineral Lab, because I was the director of a laboratory that I sold to Doctors Data. So I've had offices in Tokyo and Amsterdam, Boston, San Francisco. I understand heavy metals pretty well, having put on conferences worldwide. And heavy metals are absolutely behind some of these things like the 1 out of 2 getting Alzheimer's. So if you're going to understand, getting it in the vein with chelation doesn't take it out of your bones, sorry to tell you. But you get it out of the soft tissues. Your vision gets better, the kidneys. Chelation helped me when I was a basket case. I had closed my medical office. I went into radiology because I was too sick to do anything in general practice. I was really sick. And I thought by going to Mount Zion Hospital in San Francisco, I'd find out how big pharma, and they would fix me, big medicine. After 1 year, I saw how much damage we do, and I fled. And I went out and got into this kind of medicine. So it's not hard to know where the toxins are coming from. The far away as China, 30% of your mercury in your body in San Francisco is directly from Beijing, documented by the radioisotope testing. So this isn't going to go away, folks. So you need to figure out what you're going to do. If oral chelation, zeolite, high-dose C, are you going to do something? Fiber? You know, it's nice to have that throwaway journal called JAMA. That journal publishes right out of Harvard that the lead in your bone determines how soon you go blind or how soon you die. But there isn't anybody talking this way because it costs about $500,000 to have that non-invasive test because you don't know how much lead is in your bone. And who wants to take a biopsy? That's no fun. So it's nice to know that it's all published. And it's really good stuff because you see, when I started the chelation movement as the founder of ACAM, co-founder with several other people, I founded that 38 years ago. If I had said then that lead was the cause of heart disease, they would have locked me up as insane. Now we have the American Heart Association's journal called Circulation, Lead Unmasked as Silent Heart Killer. So understand, as an expert at this field, the cholesterol hypothesis is total fraud. If you understand that you're only interested in oxidized cholesterol, and we want you to understand that all of these metals, unfortunately, become synergistically more. So 1/100th of the dose of lead becomes totally toxic and causes death when there's mercury present. So then you understand that as the father of chelation, I love it. And anybody who can do an IV chelation, I wish they would do it. That's why I've changed it from a 3-hour treatment to a 5-minute treatment called the short chelation. And I wrote in Townsend newsletter how I spent all this time and found out these 3 books today took $10 million of the research in the 60s when $10 million was real money. And it took that in order to figure out how to make those oral chelator, that 9-pill, replace heparin, Coumadin, Plavix, replace all of it. In my patients, I canceled bypass on all patients because I tell them you can die on the table. And if you die on this, you'll be the first one, because we haven't had a phone call in many, many years of anybody taking that packet of 9 pills, because we figured out in these 3 books how to make the EDTA that's in there take a mucopolysaccharide from the ocean and make it work exactly like heparin. So the hormone story becomes important, because now if you're going to live so much longer, I want you to be able to open the doors when you're 90 years of age. So don't tell me that you're not going to need to do DHEA and you're not going to have to learn about melatonin. You're going to have to learn about a safe answer to the estrogen, because estrogen is the major growth hormone. So we have safe answers. Now the growth hormone, I don't want to use the shots. So I found a way. Obviously, we published at Dr. Frackleton that when you take the mercury out of the body, the pituitary comes back to life, and a lot of you don't need so much growth hormone, but I found a way to support your growth hormone, and we call it beyond growth hormone support, and it's tribulus, mumio, and hypothalamic factors. So I can fight this process, which is why at this age I am now riding my bike straight up a mountain, doing things that I haven't done most of my life. So there are advantages to replacing your growth hormone. But Pueraria mirifica is a word that I hope all of you will now put into your consciousness, because Robert Rowans has just sent a newsletter out to 100,000 people about this product, which I have worked on for 10 years with the Thailand Research Council and the director of the Army Hospital in Thailand, MD, PhDs, to prove that we have a factor here that could take and safely take every woman off of any estrogen, whether it's bioidentical or not, and have her have bones, have her have no insomnia, have her have no vaginal dryness, no irritability, none of the depression. Across the board, this is documented because it is a selective estrogen receptor modulator of the beta receptor, and this is a huge story. Anybody wanting details, all you have to do is contact Longevity Plus, and they will send you enough flyers that you can become an expert, because we thought that we would get it approved as a functional food in the United States and take everybody off Premarin. But of course, Premarin is powerful enough that nobody at FDA would ever approve a food as an alternative to having people on drugs. So HRT is a huge story. And that I, as a man, take it because I understand where the estrogen interferes with my prostate health. And I, too, wind up with other things. I had advanced osteoporosis, so when my horse kicked me off, I wound up with all the pins. And I didn't know I had weak bones. So, it takes a long time to learn out how many things were really wrong with me, with total gastric, no stomach acid at all. Clearly, I wasn't doing well on absorbing things, but it's interesting. I take testosterone. I wouldn't live a day without it. And maca is part of something I give to everybody because it raises the free testosterone, but it improves LH and FSH on all my women patients. And because it triples copulative activity on rodents, it can't be bad for you. So toxins are ubiquitous in our environment. And that quote right here, all of us under experiment, this is the director of preventive medicine at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. The problem is his test costs $4,900. And it takes 20 tubes of blood. So none of you have done it. But we've done it on enough people that no one has ever passed it, whether it's Jim Lerner or any of the top people that offered it. And finally, we started doing babies, and it's called the 10 American Study. If you haven't heard about it, it's on my website. This is the 10 American Study. This is what we found in every child selected at random across the United States. But we didn't want to do a $4,900 test. We did one for $13,000. And so we took these 10 children and we took the cord blood, and this is all published. Anybody can find it. You just put in the word 10 Americans on Google and you'll have it. Or you can, the people who paid for it is the Environment Working Group. They just want to save our nation so that you understand how toxic the things are that we're doing to our bodies. But this is neurotoxins in everybody, carcinogens in everybody, endocrine disruptors. These are the simple facts. That's why you need to learn about zeolite and fiber and how I approach these problems. Now, since I had that heart block, it's interesting for all of you to know that they want to talk about how statins can help reduce the free radicals that they say are causing the atrial fibrillation. It's becoming epidemic, and people are getting pacemakers, and they all are put on Coumadin, which I take because we have lumbroskinase right here with our good friends Canada RNA. So I add that to see. I already have in here heparin, but I have patients today who are so hypercoagulable with underlying things like they have the hypercoagulative defects that we wind up like Leiden 5 and antiphospholipid syndrome. So that I wind up having to add many people the lumbroskinase in addition to that just to protect myself. Most people can't afford it, so they settle up just taking the oral chelation because it has the Coumadin effect. But when you see this stuff, hydrogen becomes another story. When I first got into orthomolecular medicine, we wanted to honor Dr. Albert Sven-Gorgi as the discoverer of the molecule of vitamin C. And so he's giving a lecture to us, and he starts talking about hydrogen. And I thought, what's hydrogen got to do with it? Well, hydrogen, folks, is a major electron donor. And it turns out it is one of the most needed nutrients. And of course, it's quite a big story. The more you learn about this hydrogen story, the more you will be prepared to find that it is actually that we're deficient and none of us are operating optimally. Now, what's interesting is this. I keep going to every meeting, and I always start out with the fact that when I first moved to the house I live in, it was a hill like that. I could barely walk to the top of the hill. Then I keep on learning. Now I'm riding my bike as long as to do enough crisscrosses. Now each time, but when I added this hydrogen, all of a sudden I'm at the top of the hill and the pulse rate has hardly gone up. So it suggests to me there might be something that I needed to learn here. I'd been negative about it because, BTA and, biological terrain. You guys, what's that got to do with anything? Until you start talking about ORP, oxidative reductive potential, and all of a sudden this electron story becomes a nice story. So as you get more into it, the effect of hydrogen ions on cell walls becomes quite an interesting story. I have found and have been able to introduce something that gives you a quadrillion, trillion of these little electrons in one little tablet. You put the tablet in and the hydrogen is released from the water, but you want to keep a cap on the bottle because you don't want all the hydrogen to go off into the room. You'd like to get some of the hydrogen in the water, so when you drink that water, you have the benefit that I've seen. So the literature on that is available at Longevity Plus. But I want to make sure all of you understand zeolite, Because if you're a hog farmer, chicken farmer, your neighbors hate you because the ammonia smell. It's really bad. If you buy zeolite, just cheap zeolite, because zeolite can be cheap if it's being used for cat litter, or it can be very expensive if it's being used for space travel. Now, how come zeolite would be used for space travel? Well, when you go to Mars, you're going to have to drink your own urine and your own sweat for the 2 years, so you might want a really good filter. And so the filter that I'm telling you about was designed for that. And so this is going to take care of these heavy metals and organopoisoning, and it's going to help treat, according to Memorial Sloan Kettering, they're doing studies on zeolite for the Croatian government, because I was asked to bring zeolite from Europe and Croatia to America, but when I found a far better source, by being that I go to every meeting somewhere in the world every week, I found an even far more advanced form of the zeolite. So what we have is able to treat diarrhea, anti-cancer, antioxidant. In fact, in Europe, they take a teaspoon of it up to 16 times a day, and they're getting good success on colon cancer, pancreatic. But it's kind of interesting. There's so much to learn about it. It traps the nitrosamines, it chelates and removes the heavy metal. But the nice thing is it traps it once. When you take things like DMSA and DMPS, that takes the mercury and takes it through your liver, and your liver delivers it to your intestine. But there you can have enterohepatic reuptake unless you take all the stuff that I tell people they need. I want something in your gut at all times that if you are delivering that mercury in the form of a combination with DMSA to the gut, I don't want it to go 2 feet and then have the mercury leave my right eye and wind up back in my left eye. So it's important to understand these things, and zeolite is really a good answer to it. So the zeogold is doing things that are not widely known, but we actually find that it's far better when you add humic acid, and then we add glutathione. In addition to that, we put in my very special form of the vitamin C, so that it is a vitamin C delivery system, but it's just a small dose, and people need a far higher dose of that. But across the board, we always give them the all-R lipoic acid. And we're going to honor Dr. Berkson on December 14th at the Arizona Homeopathic Meeting for Dr. Berkson, who tried to teach us that if the patient is going to die of mushroom poisoning, you put some lipoic acid in the arm. Well, lipoic acid is a huge story. And to get you more interested in it, some people are finding that it is not just useful in enhancing the treatment of cancer, but even making people with metabolic defect so that they cannot lose weight suddenly do better. So it's important to help document things for patients. So this is where, instead of the ORAC test, now New Skin took a simple test that measured carotenoids in people's fingers, and they made it into a multi-million-dollar, multi-level company. But it's pretty light stuff. I mean, noni juice and acai is not getting me excited because it's not stopping death. So I like to go into the real science. So when I move from the little free radical ORAC into this stuff, I'm now taking you into where Jeff Bland first started training all of us with T-bars as a proven thing of saying, what is the level of lipid peroxidation in your body? So melandialdehyde is the end result of the breakdown of the membranes of your cells. So we can measure that in your urine, but by the time you get the measurement back, the patient spent money, they've gone home. You're going to call them up and explain it? No. We're going to teach you that you can now do this right now on the spot by having them breathe. And you take it right out of the expired air. And it will even tell us not only who's going to sick and die, they think one day it'll even be a test for things like lung cancer. But what's interesting is you've got immediate feedback now, because when you start to get into this in exhaled air, the conda as a marker of oxidative stress. Well, when you understand this story, when this test is high, the person has high levels of oxidized LDL. That's the only cholesterol that we should be worried about at all. All the rest is nonsense. And so this leads to autoimmune disease and coronary artery disease. So what can we do with it? Well, it's a biomarker. We can look at the analysis. It's on PubMed. You can read up on this thing. And we can then actually do a test. And they're going to get you a couple grand to have a colorimeter test. And they're going to wind up that you blow up a balloon. And the balloon has a little thing about the size of a birthday candle. And as you blow through that to blow it up, it catches, and the little condensate on the color change tells us how much of these serious free radicals, breakdown of your fats, how much we have going on. So this is what my test looked like, but I now know that since we've now had a chance to play with the test, that when I put anybody on the PEMF and add the hydrogen, I can bring that test down even lower. So some of the doctors are interested in this, because if we don't have something to reward patients about the benefits of our treatment, it gets expensive, and everybody wants to know you've helped them. That's why I mentioned the imhealth.com website, because as an expert at measuring how old you are, we have every test in there so that you could become a world expert at it. We spent $1 million on how to put all that together at that website. But what I'm teaching you here is that the patients who actually change their diet and stop eating some of the fast food and start getting into fruits and vegetables, and then when they go from that and actually take some decent antioxidant supplements, they're going to see the test coming down versus the people who are not. So there's some ability now to motivate people to change things. Now, where's the future going? The future is going that the cost of doing gene testing is dropping like a stone. And so one day we're actually today able to offer for $425 gene testing that used to cost $2,500. And so it comes out with a report, and all of a sudden you'll sound really knowledgeable because there's a lot of stuff now. But in the $10,000 pill was merely a note that with the cost of doing our entire chromosome DNA analysis, that's coming down also. And so they're pointing out that the big drug companies are seeing that the future is in personalized medicine. And the more we have something to base that on, it's going to allow a company to read your DNA structure and pinpoint the genetic condition. So this is already happening. Wealthy people are sometimes getting into this. Now, the guy that we used as the poster boy for the National Geographic to prove how toxic every one of you are, David Ewan Duncan, got so interested in this testing that he wound up, because that was just that $5,000 test at Mount Sinai. So he wound up getting some people to put some money in. He's now spent $500,000 testing himself with things tests you've never heard of. But I'm only mentioning it because any test, the simple test on your urine that shows something wrong, or the simple test that tells you that you're getting too close to cancer, or the test that instead of being 76, some of my tests are 96, so anything that can motivate people to stick with our program will be useful. This is the actual test that I'm talking about, the $425 test that's now available. I do consultation to explain people how to use that. I use some of these products in a detox with the fiber and the green and the maca and the vitamin C and the Zeogold. And the thing is, this is the supplement that nobody would take unless you were sick as I once was. Because this is going to cost you a couple grand a month to be on everything that I've been taking. But taking all of that, I still had really bad back pain. I was getting more and more stooped over. I have been everywhere to try to stop my back pain. My kidney had been bad since my horse kicked me when I was a child, and it was going to take it out because it bled profusely. But we finally decided to leave it in, so I had chronic urinary tract, low-grade bladder, prostate. So I was urinating every hour, on the hour, for the last 40 years. And so that got inconvenient and tiresome. And then with that heart skipping 1 out of 3 beats, it's kind of interesting that now this program kept me feeling pretty good. I mean, better than I was when I had to close my medical practice at age 29. But it was interesting that PEMF, and I actually sleep on a 20-gauss pad that Dr. Dean Bondley sells. It costs $3,600. It's 400 pounds of magnets, and I've had it for 10 years, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. But it didn't stop those conditions because it stayed at that level. It's only when I went to the 19,000 Gauss that those of you who come by will experiment that I found out that you can have all the fuel, you can have all the filters, you can have all the racing tires, but I didn't have my battery charged up. I want all of you to have this kind of energy. There's tons of stuff on YouTube, and I have lots of stuff on my website. I invite all of you to learn more. My Fight for Health that we've discussed briefly is on my website in a 19-page review, or a 7 hours of webinars discussing the food, the infection, the genetics. And I want to make sure that all of you understand that we are all today inundated with too much information. Those of you who belong to my FACT group are learning because I send out 3 emails to you each day, and then discussions start taking from there. So if you want to know everything about ALS or breast cancer, there's a free place. Just join FACT. In the handout, you go to my website and join. But there's another thing. This guy has actually taken and found all the PubMed literature that would talk about somebody with breast cancer, diabetes, inflammation, and insomnia. And you can put those 4 conditions in, and it will go through the PubMed database and give you the most relevant articles so that you can decide if it's curcumin or cinnamon you want to give your patient. So there's some things. I hope that you can join FACT. It's been my pleasure to be with you today. We'll have a slower discussion tonight to kind of cover the PMF. Thank you for your attention.